open source stage. Matt did a great job installing opening for us, doing his thing. Welcome everybody. Let's do quick intros for the people of the audience specifically, and you, the viewer. Yes. I'm just so happy to be here with everyone. João, do you want to say your name correctly and also give a quick intro? Let's maybe, we have a little bit of time, but maybe keep intros short so we can get to the good stuff.
I'm João. I work at OpenNode. We basically do payments in the Bitcoin space. One of the first to do Lightning. Happy to be here.
Cool, I'm Lisa, also known as Nifty Nye. I work at Blockstream on Core Lightning, recently renamed. Yeah.
I'm Roy. I'm building Breeze. Breeze is a Lightning wallet and a platform to interact with the Lightning economy.
And I'm Ryan Gentry. I do business development at Lightning Labs, where we develop LND and liquidity services, which is the topic of the talk.
Perfect. I'm glad you're able to make it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I'm Michael Tidwell, moderating this great panel of candidates here, panelists. I run infrastructure at Zebedee, a gaming platform company. So let's jump into it. And I think the first thing I want to do is let's maybe talk about a little bit of history of LSPs. I have no idea what an LSP is, being fairly new to Lightning myself. Maybe someone on the panel, maybe Roy, can break down what is an LSP? Who even made up this term? What is this?
That's a good question. I don't know. Someone came up with the term. LSP is a Lightning service provider. It's kind of the way that everyone can plug into the Lightning network. Similarly to the way that you have an ISP and you plug your router in your home and you're plugged into the internet, the same way we need an infrastructure in Lightning that allows you to be connected to the network as seamlessly as possible. So that's why, I remember I coined the term LSP.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's why I came up with this concept of a Lightning service provider, and that's the service that facilitates this connectivity to the Lightning network.
Great, and I just want to say, it seems, I feel like we could talk about this stuff maybe for like an hour and a half, because we're all doing pretty different things with Lightning, and like LSPs and whatnot. Like for instance, Zebedee is doing custodial LSP stuff, and Breeze, on the other hand, non-custodial, and we have a lot of cool things in between. I mean, there's so much to dig into.
Yeah.
I kind of want to, maybe we can kind of piecemeal this and kind of see where it goes, but because these topics, because within LSPs there's so many different kind of, I guess you can say, use cases and implementations, I guess you could say. Maybe we start with non-custodial Breeze route and then kind of work our way to what everyone else is doing?
Yeah, sure. Not to shit on custodial solutions, but the only way that you can do Lightning is in a non-custodial fashion. Lightning is the extension of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, all the properties of Bitcoin of being censorship resistant, open, borderless, etc. We need to bring that to the Lightning network. So the only way that you can do Lightning is in a non-custodial fashion, and the function of an LSP in that topology is how do you, as a user, how do you connect to the network? You actually need to run a node, right? The node is the entity that facilitates your participant in the network. So let's say you were able to run a node, and in Breeze, for example, we allow you to run a node on your mobile device. A node can do anything inside the Lightning network without the ability to plug into the network. So the LSP is the bridge between the network and the end user node. And the way that the LSP needs to connect the user to the Lightning network is by opening a channel. There's an entity in Lightning Network which is called a payment channel. The LSP needs to open a payment channel and provide liquidity to the end user.
So for the other panelists here, does anyone have a different take. Like for instance, the thing that Roy just described, does it scale? Does anyone have any like maybe counter objection or slightly different angle that they would want to talk about here, or does everyone just 100% agree with Roy? I'm just curious.
I think the key thing that Roy said that I definitely agree with is, when we think about Lightning, we think about there's the core of the network, which is largely service provider nodes, big nodes that are doing routing, and then there's the edges of the network, right, which is generally the users, right? And so some users will be, operating on a custodial node, some will be on non-custodial, but that function of connecting the core to the edge, that is the service that's provided, is connecting you to the broader Lightning network, which, I particularly work with a bunch of, like a cross-section of a bunch of different LSPs, like everybody on the stage, Lisa aside. There's all sorts of different use cases and different things that people are doing on Lightning, from sending funds to emerging markets, from playing games, from paying podcasters, etc. And the function of making that connection seamless, of making sure that you can get from sats from the edge of the network through the core to some other destination, like that function at its core is what the Lightning service provider does.
And I would say it depends on the end user too. If you're talking of a big company, publicly traded company, they might not at this time be ready to run a non-custodial, infrastructure. They need some compliance stuff, the stuff we don't like, but that is necessary. So they might come, in this case, to us, because that's what they need to show to the regulators to we're legit. We're running a service that complies to all the stuff that they need. So at the end of the day, it really depends on the end user, right? For me, from my perspective, obviously I would want this to be all non-custodial. But sometimes, if you're like McDonald's, they cannot run a non-custodial service today because they don't have an MTL, for instance. They're in the food business or real estate business, maybe. They're not in the finance business. So it really depends on where your goals as a company. Like, do you want to waste time pursuing that license, or do you just want to get a quick shortcut and get plugged into the Bitcoin network? So I feel like there's service for everything.
Lisa, or Nifty 9, did you want to chime in on anything here?
When we're talking about liquidity, I think one thing, maybe be interesting to kind of talk a little more broadly about what is liquidity on Lightning.
Before we jump into that, let me ask a quick follow-up for João.
Got it.
Which I still don't recognize you, even though I've known you for years. The hair's throwing me off. So do you feel like companies will probably, even long-term, will probably be non-custodial, and then maybe your end users, your actual non-business users are going to be non-custodial, or do you not see it that way?
I feel like there is a transition phase, right? Right now, they need to go through these services like what we do. But eventually, long-term, the goal is to be able for the business to be self-serving, right? And ideally, the utopia is every business runs their own infrastructure, they're in control of their money. But the reality is, I don't see that happening very soon.
So 2 weeks, 2 years, 20
I don't know.
years?
I don't want to give a timeline. That's like asking what's the price of Bitcoin in 2 years.
Well, I was going to ask that next. Okay. Well, maybe we jump into the other L, the liquidity.
Oh, yeah,
So
totally.
why don't you tee that off?
Yeah, totally. So I think one thing that's useful to understand when you're talking about liquidity service providers is exactly what service they're providing, right? What is that liquidity that the L in liquidity service provider stands for? And it kind of goes back to how the Lightning network is set up and what when we're talking about liquidity, we're literally talking about Bitcoin that's being committed to Lightning channels, right? And there's kind of this inherent problem with moving money over Lightning Network, and that is who and where is that Bitcoin that's been committed to Lightning channels locked up? Who's got it? Who's got the ability to use that locked up Bitcoin to pay someone else, right? This is becomes a kind of complicated problem, right? There's only so much Bitcoin in the world. What is it? Did we hit 18? Is it 19 million? 19 million was the thing. So there's only 19 million Bitcoin. a lot of that Bitcoin lives in cold storage or exchanges or people's like wallets at home, whatever. And then there's even a smaller part of that that ends up getting locked into Lightning channels, right? So I think one thing is like, okay, there's only so much Bitcoin available to be used on Lightning, etc. Okay, so then you've got the amount of Bitcoin that's locked into Lightning channels. Then, in order, like, once you're operating on the Lightning network, your ability to send and receive payments, sending payments is, like, I'm going to say a little bit easier. You can buy some Bitcoin, lock it into a Lightning channel, and then send it. So that's kind of like sending Bitcoin, sending Lightning over Bitcoin to some extent is bring your own sats. Like, you've got some money, and you're probably going to, like, put it in and send it out somewhere else. The harder problem is receiving money on Lightning. This is like tends to be, and you guys should definitely correct me if I'm wrong, this tends to be kind of the gap that liquidity service providers fill in for that edge network that Ryan was talking about earlier. So the work of figuring out like, okay, we only have so much Bitcoin locked into channels, or like as a liquidity service provider, if someone wants to receive a payment, the liquidity service provider has to figure out how to get Bitcoin to them from whatever channels, etc. they've got Bitcoin locked into already, etc. So we call this problem of like getting the ability to receive Bitcoin over Lightning, we call that inbound liquidity. Inbound liquidity is like kind of a valuable, difficult thing to get on Lightning. Part of the reason for this is you have to convince someone else to make that Bitcoin available to you before you can receive payments. So LSPs help solve this problem, and again, please like help correct me if I'm wrong here. You guys have a lot more hands-on experience with this than I do. But LSPs are the service that provides basically the ability to receive and send, but the receive part is the really difficult part of payments over Lightning. So some of the work that goes into that is like, okay, where do you have all this Bitcoin available? So like, you have to get Bitcoin available such that you can then pay it out to people, right? Someone else is going to pay you on the other end, but I think another, like, this is a little bit of a tangent, but sort of similar. Another thing about Bitcoin liquidity on Lightning is that I would call Lightning a over-collateralized network. If you want to send a Bitcoin from your node to 3 hops away, because Lightning is routed, you need 3 Bitcoin of Bitcoin already locked into Lightning before you can send 1 Bitcoin 3 hops away. So every payment that's made over Lightning requires a multiple of Bitcoin to already be committed to the Lightning network. So liquidity management and you kind of step back a little bit. It's okay, like we need a lot more Bitcoin on the network in order to make payments work than the actual volume of the payments that are going through the network currently as it stands. Maybe we'll come up with some really fancy ways to do rehypothecation on Lightning. But today...
So you mean there will be 22 million Bitcoin?
Yeah. Maybe we'll expand the Bitcoin supply, but like there's this, anyway, this is like the like sort of philosophical problem about liquidity on Lightning. So like then, you're doing liquidity, it's like, okay, you're providing liquidity to people, like how much Bitcoin do you have? How do you attract more people that have Bitcoin that isn't on Lightning to bring their Bitcoin into the Lightning network such that we can use it as payment rails to move, value around between people, etc. That's a long talk.
So you made it pretty clear. Inbound liquidity is one of the biggest challenges right now for onboarding new people. It's one of the biggest challenges right now. And I'm curious. Maybe we can talk about how is this challenge being addressed, the inbound liquidity challenge. And what are we doing to tackle this problem? Because there's a couple different ways, right?
So one thing that I think was really interesting last week when Kraken finally turned on their node and got to join the Lightning Network. Their node, like last I looked, they had like rocketed up to something like number 10 in total capacity on the network.
Everyone here is probably guilty of helping that.
Probably, yeah. But I think what's really interesting is like the inbound liquidity problem is generally absolutely agreed with Lisa that it is like the scarce resource and the hard thing to acquire. But then you have an entity like Kraken where people are like, hey, we want them to succeed. We think there's going to be a ton of fees to be earned by routing payments to the Kraken node, like, let's allocate a ton of capital to them, where they don't even have to pay for it. We'll just kind of like optimistically think that that's where we're going to earn a return from.
It's like,
right?
it's like if you're so cool and popular, it's like life is easy for you. You know what I mean?
I know. I don't know anything about that. That must be nice. So I think that's been like a really interesting thing. We've seen that a couple times where there are like new services that pop up on Lightning, and they ask, you know, like, how can I go and get connected to the network? And we're just still in these early days where like kind of the best solution still is like put up the bat signal on Twitter and say like, hey, we have a new node, can you please connect to us? And the community will generally, you know, open the channels to you. As it matures and the network gets bigger, I think it's fundamentally a market problem, right? It's, as Lisa said, well, you're trying to convince somebody to allocate capital to your direction, and like, what's the best way to do that? Well, you just pay them, right?
I agree, because right now I feel like for Lightning companies or Lightning service providers, there's almost kind of like right now an excess of capital where it's like, I don't want to just deploy this randomly, but when I see a Kraken, I suddenly have plenty of capital to deploy, you know, and I think we're kind of past like the 2019, 2020, 2021 where we just want to open up random channels to everyone. We want to be a little bit more thoughtful on that. So
it definitely has matured for sure.
I would say there are two different issues, like connecting to routing nodes to other hubs in the network and onboarding end user.
Yes.
These are two completely separate problems.
Would you think that that's like the core and edge distinction?
Yeah. And then an end user can be like a service like OpenNode as well. Like, but yeah, so let's say an edge, onboarding edges and connecting to other nodes in the network. These are completely two separate problems. And I don't know if it's easy to send in the Lightning Network right now, because in order to send, you need to first receive, and then before you're able to send, you need to receive and to solve the inbound liquidity problem. So I think there are, what's cool about the inbound liquidity problem, that is it's being solved for end users at least. Like we don't have enough tools to manage liquidity efficiently currently in the Lightning Network, but at least to onboard users, there are a set of solutions that were put into place in order to facilitate this out-of-the-box inbound liquidity issue. One of the solutions is what we're doing at Breeze, opening zero confirmation channels. So we actually utilizing the liquidity of the end user in order to open liquidity, to allocate liquidity to the user end. So we open a channel and we push liquidity, the same liquidity that the user used to top up the wallet, we use it in order to provide inbound liquidity. That's one solution. Another solution is pool. Solution like pool from Lightning Labs is the ability to lease liquidity and to open a channel which is leased for, by default, a month, 2 weeks. What's the default?
There's a duration for 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, and a year.
Okay, I believe that's very cool. And the third solution from Lisa, I think, worked on it. It's liquidity ads where nodes can announce that they are willing to rent you liquidity for such and such price.
So we have Pool, we have Breeze with the model where if I download the Breeze wallet, I get inbound liquidity kind of by being a user of Breeze. Yeah, the liquidity app. I'm actually a little bit unfamiliar. Would you like to?
Yeah, I can talk about them a bit. So liquidity ads is a proposal that I wrote for the Lightning spec, so it's specified. That means that we are working with other Lightning implementations so that hopefully it'll be supported by every node on the Lightning network. It's basically a way to, I call it like a billboard system of advertising that you've got liquidity that you're looking to deploy. This billboard ad that you can put up, you can put in like how much you're looking to get for the capital that you have available. So you set your own rate of how much that your available capital is worth to you, and you can set that. You put it into a little advertisement. Those advertisements go into something in Lightning we call the gossip network, which every node on the network sends and receives. So you can advertise, you put a little bit of information, this little kind of like classified ad called liquidity ads into your gossip, goes out to every node on the network. So if you're running a node right now, you're currently getting all of the liquidity ad data, it's on your node. Whether or not your node exposes that to you is a different question, but if you're on Core Lightning, you can see them. They're also available to see on lnrouter.app, which which is like there's a little dashboard. You can go look at all the liquidity ads that are currently available. Anyway, so this is the way you advertise, like, hey, I've got some capital, I'd like to deploy it, here's how much I want you to pay for me. And then you can, if you're trying to buy or get inbound liquidity, you can go look at all the nodes that are offering liquidity, where they are in the network, whether it's worth what they're offering to you or not, and then decide whether or not to take them up on their ad. So it's super decentralized. I have no information for you. It's been out for maybe like 7 months now. I have no information for you about how many people have used it or how much capital has been allocated using that market, because that data only exists between the buyer and seller. You can go look at, I think the number of ads is like, we're close to like 15, 20 these days. So it's like small but growing. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit custodial with you, but before I do that, I want to jump and wrap up maybe some pool, because we didn't really talk about pool much. Where do you see the leasing liquidity industry, the leasing channel market? What is it like now? What was it before? What's it going to become? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that since you're familiar.
Sure. So what it was previously was like before we had channel leases as like a formal kind of financial product on Lightning. It was all handshake agreements between people on the stage, right? Saying like, hey, message you on Telegram, hey, can you please open one Bitcoin channel to me? Like, we're expecting a lot of volume this weekend or something like that, right? That obviously doesn't scale if we think Lightning Network is going to be tens to hundreds of thousands of nodes, businesses being able to interact. So turning that kind of interaction into more of a market interaction, saying, I will pay you X amount or X percent of the capital that you commit to me as long as you keep that channel open for, say, a 3-month period, right? And I think the cool thing that both Pool and the Liquidity Ads construction does is that lease term is actually secured by Bitcoin script, right? So if the channel is opened, it actually, those funds can't be decommitted from that channel. Bitcoin itself will not allow that channel to be closed until the duration is up, which I think is a really cool construction.
So it's like I can either use like something like Pool or like a committer or whatever to get like inbound liquidity, or I can just start an exchange and get really popular and get a bunch of users and they get free inbound liquidity.
Yeah,
or just like a bunch of Twitter users and just say, hey, I need inbound liquidity.
Or we can download Breeze and
So I guess
the final thing that I want to say on that, though, which is really interesting, is that we've seen in Pool the lease rates are public. If you're running a node, you can download all the data and read through all the history. And so we've seen over the last couple months so far this year that demand is really starting to pick up. Rates are starting to get pretty sustainably high, which means that there is now well, maybe in the early days there was an overabundance of supply, demand is starting to kind of pick up and push prices up, which should, in theory, then induce kind of more supply coming onto the network. Because if you can earn, 6% annualized on your Bitcoin for opening a channel to a node that wants it, that's a pretty good deal.
Or you can trust all your money with a custodial, I'm not going to name names, kind of like, hey, we magically give you 6%, and they take, this is this might be the only thing I can think of that's non-custodial, actually providing a service where you can get a little bit of income on your Bitcoin potentially, right?
Absolutely, and
And that's key. We need to break a myth here. There's a misconception that Lightning is free.
Yes.
And in order for Lightning to be successful, the routing fees need to go higher, and Lightning needs, basically the entire thing about liquidity is why would people allocate liquidity to, going back to what Lisa said, what's the reason that people will put their liquidity in Lightning? They want to generate yield, right? So if people put liquidity in Lightning and they are able to generate yield, then people will put more liquidity in Lightning. So there's a circle here of traffic brings liquidity, liquidity provides yield, yield provides more traffic, traffic provides more liquidity. So we need to start thinking about Lightning as an economical tool, and Lightning, long term, if we all want Bitcoin and Lightning to be successful, it can't be as cheap as it is now.
Thank you. Can you scoot forward just a little bit?
What's that?
Just scoot forward a little bit. I'm going to tell you. These guys think non-custodial Lightning will scale. And I just want to talk like real between Zebby and OpenNode right now about how like Lightning will actually work in the future.
Actually, I have a cool story about liquidity. There were a trending that we were seeing. So we're working with like pretty big digital wallets that today in our world. And what we're doing is they actually are connecting to us saying, yo, we need to connect before launching our product. Let's do some private channels because they don't want to announce first their node on the network because they don't want to get attacked like the US. And then, so we actually signed contracts, like legal contracts about channels.
Like not smart contracts, dumb real contracts?
Paper contracts, yeah.
Okay.
Like real contracts. So it's a trend we're seeing, like we're actually like signing contracts about opening channels for these service providers. So, you know, yeah,
That's good. That's a sign of maturity of Lightning.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see that more often in the future.
One thing on the fees, which you're absolutely right on, but I just happened to be looking at the numbers last week. So Visa, MasterCard, kind of average rates that they charge for domestic payments is like, and you would know this better than me probably, is 1.29% plus 5 cents per payment. I looked at like the top 5 biggest nodes on the Lightning Network, and it just so happens that the average fee rate across those 5 nodes is like exactly 90% of that. So it's the 10x difference. It was like 13 bits or something.
Okay.
Which I think is just like a very interesting way that this free market decentralized ecosystem has kind of coalesced at a rate that is typical venture capital wisdom is in order for something to a new network to disrupt the incumbent has to be 10x better in fees. And so I thought that was just interesting that is kind of where the rates are right now.
And it happens very naturally because fees are your only tool currently within the Lightning Network to say like, how do I want the liquidity flow to be? Like, if I want the liquidity to flow from one end to another, I need to have lower fees. And if I wanted the liquidity to flow in the other way, from B to A, if I don't want the liquidity to flow from B to A, I need to set high fees. So it's basically represent like the opportunity cost of the liquidity. So and fees are the only way to control how bitcoins are flowing within this Lightning network.
When I analogize Lightning to normies, I talk about how the channels are like roads and your fees are like your traffic lights. Okay. Right, where it's like if you don't want traffic to flow down this way, you got to hike the rate, which is like turning the light red. And if you want traffic to flow, you lower the rate and make the light green, which I think is accurate.
Yeah.
Nice. I love that analogy. Yeah.
You run red lights.
Yeah. Better than my beads on the string analogy.
Well, but it takes all kinds.
Yeah. I did want to talk a little bit. I want to involve this gentleman right here, and say what do you think the challenges are? We talked a bit about non-custodial liquidity, Lightning service provider challenges. Although it doesn't fit Roy's definition to a T, we can maybe caveat it with the custodial Lightning providers. What do you think the challenges are for people like you and I, stuff like that?
I think the risk of custodying Bitcoin is the biggest challenge. I would say there's a huge risk to like hold Bitcoin. It's something that you don't want to do. And once you're holding Bitcoin from someone else, there is compliance risks. There's all certain of legal stuff that you have to go through, especially if your company is in the United States. That's why a lot of people do not make their company in the United States. But I would say the biggest challenge is definitely the user onboarding today. Obviously, custodial makes it easier, it makes it simple. Is it the solution? I don't think so. It is. I think you guys are doing a really good job on that. But so far, we're still in a transition period, right? And if you want to involve certain parties in this economy, we need to make tools that are, somehow easy enough for them. And it's a transition period. I would say, obviously, long term, the idea is to make a trustless system, non-custodial. But right now, we still have to go through this transition phase. Like, people still need the dollars,
What about hot wallet, cold wallet? concern that doesn't concern you.
That's what I was saying. It's about the
Because
risk.
when you lock, just to explain to the audience that when you lock liquidity in Lightning, it's being locked in a hot wallet.
Yes, there's definitely, so you have a threat if you expose your password, or you're not exposing your password, but there is a way that eventually someone, if they know enough about you, might be able to get that password. And when you do cold storage, that information is not accessible anywhere. But with the remote signing tools, I think we're
Getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. Not there yet, but we'll get there.
On the hot wallet risk, one interesting thing, so we have a service, a liquidity service we provide called Loop, not to be confused with Pool.
It's just you spell it backwards.
Spelled backwards, yeah.
Simple.
And so Loop is a submarine swap provider where it's a bridge between on-chain Bitcoin and off-chain Bitcoin, where if you need more inbound liquidity, you send funds to Lightning Labs, and then in a non-custodial way, we return the funds to you on-chain. One interesting use case for that, more so than just needing to acquire inbound liquidity, is actually risk management, right? If you want to make sure that the amount of capital that you have on your node stays low, that's on your side of the channels, one thing that we're seeing a lot of folks do is just continually make sure to loop out, to send funds out of their custody and return it back to their on-chain wallet, which I think is an interesting thing that, as the network has grown, has become something that, all of a sudden, certain providers say, man, we have like 100 Bitcoin in this node, like we got to be careful. We got to
Start looping out.
and start using some risk management practices, which I think is very interesting.
Cool, and we talked about a couple things. We remote signing, and in terms of the future of LSPs and things to look forward to, what kind of, I know we have Nifty here at Blockstream, we have Ryan, Lightning Labs that are working on implementations of Lightning that kind of help enable some of these things. What can
I'll tell you from a user, like from a
he's going to tell you what he needs, and then you'll
Exactly. As a guy that's
Perfect.
running an LSP, what I need better control of my liquidity. I need better flexibility to manage my liquidity. So I think in that regard, I'm looking forward to splicing. Splicing is the ability to change the capacity of the channel dynamically without closing the channel. And basically, let's say, I'll give you a very simple use case. Let's say we have a user, the user is using Breeze to get inbound liquidity. So we open a one BTC channel to the end user, the Bitcoin are on the user side, the user used the entire BTC to pay for stuff, and now I got one BTC locked in the channel on my end of the channel. And the user stopped using Breeze for some reason. I don't know why, it's a great product, but they stopped using Breeze, and now I got liquidity locked on my end of the channel as an LSP, and I need to reallocate this liquidity because I want to onboard new user using this BTC, or I want to put this liquidity somewhere else where it generates much better yield than the user that doesn't use Breeze anymore. So in order to take this liquidity out of the channel, I need a way to splice out. I need a way to dynamically configure the channel to have a lower capacity, so I'll be able to reallocate this liquidity someplace else.
So any implementation that doesn't support splicing obviously hates Bitcoin. So what are we going to do to fix this problem?
Core Lightning is working on splicing. The great news so the cool thing about the liquidity ad stuff is a lot of the background work we had to do to make liquidity ads happen lends itself real easily to making splicing happen. So we are actively working on making splicing happen. Hopefully that will come out at some point.
In 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah. We'll look forward in 2 weeks. It'll be great, yeah. So, yeah, we hear this, and I'm like, man, it's so much fun to think through all the ways that splicing lets you do wild stuff with your channels when you get it going. Yeah, the way that we wrote some of the precursor stuff we had to do before we get liquidity ads is this thing that we're calling collaborative channel opens. It used to be called dual funding, but that got a little, let's say the namespace collision started happening, so we're calling it collaborative channel opens now. Anyway, so all that work that we did to make that happen, you can do this cool stuff where you can splice across multiple channels on the same transaction with multiple peers, on Lightning, decentralized, it's cool stuff. So we're hoping to bring that to splicing real soon. So then,
Thank you, Lisa. Ryan?
Yeah. Same, 2 weeks. One is like another side of this, and as an infrastructure guy, I imagine you have thoughts on this. One really funny thing that happened like a year ago is I remember talking with a bunch of Lightning companies about kind of like what they wanted from L&D in the year 2021. And it was the first time that instead of it being new features and new techniques and new cool bells and whistles, it was can we have accounting software? Can we have like a more scalable database, right? It's like very like adult requests instead. And so I think that's like the other lens of this is running the infrastructure and scaling like your back end and like the Postgres stuff that we're working on, that kind of making sure that just your nodes stay online, that they're easy to manage, that you have all the data that you need as well, like data that you need for reporting requirements and accounting stuff, like all of those kind of boring tools as well is something that is increasingly more in demand as Lightning companies get bigger, succeed, raise money, and get more kind of.
That's Ryan Wait saying we wait.
So
I said 2 weeks.
yeah. I am curious though, maybe this is something that anyone can talk about. Does Bolt 12 or Taproot affect LSPs, and if so, what way? What's better? Because I know, like for instance, LND is a little bit more, or sorry, not LND. Lightning Labs is a little bit more focused on supporting Taproot, and I was just curious. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. How in its relation to providing service like LSP.
Well, so I think Taproot, just from like a fundamental level, just opens up like a much bigger design space for what can be done on Lightning. I think it enables a lot more use cases, just kind of upgrading the channel commitment types and things like that to supporting Taproot. It's more of like kind of like a platform upgrade, so to speak, to think of, right? And I think that's kind of like a little bit of a longer term thing where you can think of for instance, I know one thing that Roast Beef is working on is the concept of dynamic commitments, where like right now, if you wanted to upgrade a channel that's a normal pre-Taproot channel, you would need to close the channel and then reopen a new Taproot one and spend to a new Taproot output. Working on a proposal to be able to allow that to happen. If you think about that at scale, right, there's something like 80,000 channels on the network right now, public channels, like 80,000 Bitcoin transactions, closing channels, and then reopening would be like pretty heavy. But with dynamic commitments, being able to do that kind of on the fly, upgrading your commitment output without changing the channel is a cool thing that then allows for wacky things like our proposal yesterday, Taro, which leverages, it will be Taproot channels, where you can send assets that aren't Bitcoin, say a fiat-backed stablecoin or something like that. You could send those over the Lightning Network. Those channels require Taproot outputs, right? So things like that.
And that proposal actually increased the demand of liquidity inside the network, because these assets move between one node to the other. They're being Bitcoinized.
Bitcoinizing the dollar.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the meaning.
So you need more Bitcoin collateral in order to facilitate new assets. That will increase the demand of having more liquidity in the Lightning Network.
Yep.
Nifty or John, did you want to chime in on?
I would say privacy, right? I think it's the big one here. It's the basic one. Taproot will bring privacy to Lightning, because today you can literally look at on-chain and see what channels were closed and kind of figure out the liquidity and what's happening. And with Taproot, it's just going to look like another transaction. So I think that's a big win.
With
we're going to talk about privacy more on Friday. I'm doing a privacy panel. We'll get way into that. I'm going to push back and say that just upgrading the Taproot outputs isn't actually going to solve the privacy problem. I think the biggest thing is moving to blinded routes in Bolt 12. Right now, no one cares about on-chain footprint. If you're handing them an invoice, it tells you where the payment's going, what you're paying for, how much it's for. Like, you don't even have to look at the chain if you give someone an invoice. So I think Taproot's cool. I think Lightning's gonna get to Taproot soon. Upgrading it, doing dynamic commitments is like an awesome thing. Miners might not like it so much as the people running the channels, but that's fine. But yeah, anyways, like Taproot's cool, it's coming. I'm really excited about the novel engineering that Labs is doing with Taproot stuff, and excited to see how that goes. But
Okay, we have a few minutes left. Do you want to do closing thoughts? You want to maybe start with João?
I want to ask LNURL versus Bolt 12.
Oh, okay. Well, let's rephrase the question real quick. Instead of doing closing thoughts, let's just do LNURL versus Bolt 12. Let's get into it. I'll set it here. Y'all go for it.
Yeah, just from a service provider, there's a lot of demand for this type of stuff. So I know Lightning Labs is a position, C-Lightning has the other position. So I'm just curious to hear both your thoughts about why you want to invest in Bolt 12 and why you don't want to invest in Bolt 12 right now. Just curious. I'm the moderator now.
So you know, Lalo published his thoughts on this, and I think he stated it well. It's like we're a small team. We have something like 26 people. There's only so many engineers, and like the priority is doing Taproot stuff. And I think in particular, one thing that we've talked a lot about is responding to the developers in particular that are building on our stuff, and we haven't had a bunch of developers beating down our door saying this is wrong, we need you to focus on Bolt 12 instead, right? Because they're kind of happy with LNURL, right? And it's bad business to tell your customers that they're wrong, and so that's we're focused on Taproot, and I think that's kind of it. I want to be clear. I don't think we think Bolt 12 is necessarily a bad proposal. I think binary routes are great. I think the static invoice is great. There's a bunch of good stuff in there. It's just not the priority for this quarter.
I think we need both. I think we need Bolt 12 facilitate payments between peers in the network without the need to have an HTTP web server. And LNURL is great for custodial services that have online presence, and it's great for merchants that have a web presence. So whenever you have a web server, you can definitely build on LNURL, but it doesn't solve the problem of the ability to send payments to other users in the network without creating an invoice first. And for that, we need Bolt 12.
But you still do have to generate an invoice, right? Bolt 12. You have the static part, but you still need to go and actually fetch.
You need a pointer. You need a pointer to begin with, but the pointer doesn't need to be like an HTTP server, right?
Yeah.
It's like AMP. What's the difference between the essential core difference between Bolt 12 and AMP? It's the ability to have proof of payment. That's for me the big difference between both. And you guys have AMP, and you don't have Bolt 12.
Well, but I think it is a little bit different because you still do need to do invoice fetching with Bolt 12, right? You still do need to get the secret to pay. Whereas with AMP, it's actually static. There is no interaction required. You can just pay to a pubkey.
Okay, but you need to receive the pubkey from somewhere. You need a pointer.
Hey, not to interrupt the family conversation here, because I love this, and I feel like we should have a Bolt 12 LNURL pay kind of discussion maybe.
Fight.
We need fiat
we should WWE people start sliding in, bringing in chairs and stuff. But we're out of time. I just want to give everyone a few seconds just to do closing. How do people know about you? If you want to show your Twitter, if you want to let people know how to follow you, whatever it might be.
Yeah, you can find us at opennode.com or OpenNode on Twitter. You can find me, João Almeida. It's a hard name, so you're not going to find it. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter.
I'm Nifty Knives, NIFTYNEI, if you want to follow my Twitter. I also work with Core Lightning, so core_LN is our Lightning node implementation. I work at Blockstream, who obviously is also on Twitter.
You can find me on the Breeze various handles, Twitter Breeze_tech, Breeze.technology, that's our website. You can join our Telegram group, Breeze.
Breeze spelled BREEZ.
Without an E at the end.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Gentry, Ryan the Gentry on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter as well at Lightning. And the website is lightning.engineering. Thank you, Michael, for such a well-moderated.
How can we find you, Michael?
Yeah, how can we find you?
I'm Mike 20 spelled out with a 1 on the end. It's so obvious. And I'm not that popular, but for some reason I have tons of scammers. I'm not giving away free Bitcoin.
And when's TapConf? The next TapConf?
Well, not to shill too much because we're at a conference, but TabConf is a technical focused conference in Atlanta, Georgia. It's going to be in October. TabConf, TABCONF, tabconf.com. Yeah, thanks for helping me shill that, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, well, all right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.